The other day, I was having a really great conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about my podcast. Yes, I talk to my friends about the podcast, and I love hearing feedback from all sources. So, friends are just one of them. You're the other, by the way. So, please make sure that you're liking, following this podcast, and certainly sending it to other people that you think could be interested. But during this conversation, what we were talking about was why did I call it midlife crisis to a centered life thriving? And her statement was something to the effect of like, give us some credit. We're not all having a midlife crisis here. So why did you call it that? And I thought, well, that's interesting. I answered her question. I'm going to answer it a little bit today in today's podcast. And the reason I think that it's deserving of its own podcast is because I think that we are at crisis levels more often than we're giving credit for and to. And I want women to better understand kind of what really are we up against in this 40 to 60 years of age range. There is a lot happening. There is a lot that we're warding off. There's a lot that we're transitioning through. And there's a lot on the other side of this, including freedom. And I want to provide that for you. And I think that it helps not to diminish what's actually occurring with us, nor diminish yourself by thinking that if you're experiencing crisis levels of things, that that's a reflection on you. It's actually a reflection on what's happening to us. The reflection on you is you're amazing. And I want you to tap into that amazingness so you can have that centered life thriving. So if you want to hear why I call it midlife crisis, why I do believe that it is crisis, and how I think that you are the most amazing thing that has ever been blessed on this earth and is going to get yourself through all of this, well, then keep listening.
I know your deep, dark secret. You don't like your life. You're a woman in midlife, and for the past 2 decades or more, you've poured yourself in to other people. You've poured yourself into your career, your family, and yet on the inside, you feel broken. And that's no way to be. I'm Dr. Natalie Marr. I'm a clinical psychologist and a life transition expert. It wasn't too long ago that I was in your shoes, waking up in my early 40s, thinking I've got 2 failed marriages, and I'm a single mom for the second time in my life. And I just knew that I could do better, that I could feel better. Fortunately for you, I have about 20 years experience clinically. And so I've created a method that will help you learn to love your story. I know that the story that you're telling yourself about your life feels awful. And I know that you think that you can't change that. I assure you, you can. And when we work together, I'm going to help you to craft a different story, a story that you love, a story that makes you want to get up every single day. Let's work together to help you love your story.
Welcome back to Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving. So excited to be here with you today, just you and I. We're going to have a little chat. We're going to have a little chat about midlife crisis. Woo, sounds fun, right? Well, I wanted to demystify some of why I call it midlife crisis to a centered life thriving for a few reasons. And I alluded to these in the intro. One of the most important ones to me is this. You are going through a lot, milady. Like really, friends, we are going through a ton right now. And I don't want us to diminish that. I don't want us to be thinking about it like, oh, well, I should be able to get through this. It's not like I, don't have the skills or haven't been around the block a couple times. This is tough, like way, way tough when your internal body is shifting at the level and magnitude it is, almost like adolescence, a second adolescence, because the hormonal changes are huge. And it isn't just hormones, but hormones are messengers that affect other systems within our body. So every system in your body, top to bottom, is going to change into this second stage of life. That's just the reality. So that's just the beginning, right? That's what's happening on the inside of our bodies. Woo, there are things happening on the outside. And I don't like it that we get this attitude about us like, well, I'm not going through a midlife crisis. Like it's a character flaw. Like it's a you thing. Honey, it isn't you. This is all the obnoxiousness that's happening. This is just what you're up against. And I think if we are more battle ready, if we are more aware of the crisis level at which we are changing things all at the same time, systems are changing all at the same time, and how much of our energy that's going to take for us to get to the other side of this where we've evolved into what we're going to be in the second act of life, which, by the way, I'm really hoping has something to do with being a changeling forever, because I don't think that we arrive and then we've got all our stuff together for the second half of life. I want to have you be a centered life thriving, which means that you're going to grasp this idea that we are always changing and have a growth mindset. That's just me. Hopefully we'll get you there eventually, but I don't want you to start seeing midlife crisis as a personalized flaw. Midlife crisis is just a state of where we're at in life transition, and crisis levels of things are happening. Now, what we're going to talk about today and unpack a little bit is that when you're experiencing it as a crisis and it is above the amount of resources that you have available to you, that's where you start to run into problems. That's where you start to feel impaired by it all, feel weighed down and overwhelmed by it all, and notice maybe even some behaviors on your part that are not great, that you're grasping at straws and trying to do the best that you can with what you've got, right? I do want to make sure that you kind of have an idea of when you've crossed into that place and some ideas about how to anchor out and back into a place where you are being that amazing battle ready woman that you already are. I mean, really, there are so many things about you that have you prepared for this. You just didn't know that. And one of the things that you didn't know, because culture was telling you this, is that somehow being in change and being uncomfortable is a bad thing. That's the message that we've gotten. That was the memo that we were sent. Ladies. So one of the main things that I want to just blow out of the water, debunk, demystify, whatever you want to call it, is that yes, we're at crisis levels of change, and how we're showing up to that is why you're listening to this podcast. What skills, what abilities, what resources you have available to you. Yes, that is an important piece. Can we change that it's crisis pitch level of things that are going on around us? No. Nope, that's just part of the life transition. That's the boat we're in right now in life. However, you can show up to it really well. You can be able to respond and be prepared for anything, which is different than being prepared for everything. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, some of the other reasons, I'm going to kind of put a pin in that and come back. Some of the other reasons I want you to know this is I want you to take serious the amount of things that are happening and what statistics are telling us about how well or not well women are doing at this stage in life transition. So one thing that I love to remind people as we talk about midlife crisis is that the term itself was coined by a psychologist in the 60s. He was a white dude. Can I just say that? And what he was talking about were some of the telltale responses of not so great responses when you're going through this amount of life transition. And it was very male centric. So those ideas of divorcing, getting sports cars, dating people that are much younger than you, those responses were some of the key top responses that he noted as he coined this phrase and came up with this idea that there is this midlife transition. So let's throw that out. Can we first just say no, that midlife crisis, first of all, is just midlife transition. Midlife transition has a lot of things going on. If your body mind is interpreting it at crisis levels, then it's doing the right thing because it knows that a lot of things are changing all at once. And if it has the skills that it needs to respond to that, it's taxing, it's a lot of work, and it's doable. If the body and mind don't have enough resources, then that's where you'll start to see things like depression, anxiety start to rise, clinical levels of it, and you may even need a little bit of assistance. Now, I say a little bit of assistance because I mean like accessing maybe hormonal replacement therapy that'll help you with the biology of it. So you're going to a doctor, maybe going to see somebody like myself, a therapist, a psychologist, even a religious counselor of some kind, if you're looking for some spiritual guidance through this process. But you're looking for kind of a guide along the way, somebody that can kind of point you in the right directions if part of not knowing what resources to use is just that. It's just not knowing what resources to use. It's not that you don't have capacity for it. It's that you just need a little nudging and a little assistance along the way, right? So this is not a character flaw. I'll go back to that it's at crisis levels. That's just the nature of the beast. What we're more interested in is, do you have enough resources internally and externally within your life as it is right now, right today, that you'll get through this front to back okay, without much assistance other than what you've already got available to you? Great. Then you're on your way in a midlife transition to do this well. Keep listening to my podcast because I'll keep reminding you of the different skill sets you have and the different resources you have and how to utilize them well. But honestly, podcasts like this become a resource like that for you at this stage. For those of you who have gotten into the deeper waters or the hotter waters, whatever you want to call it, of not having the resources available, not knowing what they are, not having enough internal fortitude right now to take on all of what's being thrown at you in this stage of your life transition, then let's talk about what are some of the symptoms that you'll see and what are some of the common responses to those symptoms that you'll see. Because midlife crisis for women looks different than it does for men. And that has a lot to do with how we're acculturated. But midlife crisis levels of feeling like your stress levels are higher than your level or capacity to handle it, that's the same on the inside for men and women, right? So part of what was kind of really unfortunate about in the 60s when we came up with this term and we looked at things like those responses that men were having, divorcing, dating people that were younger, getting sports cars. I'm just throwing it out there. They're the quintessential top three that we have been talking about for 60 years. Let's stop for a hot second and back up, okay? Because they are the responses. They're what you see out in the world. They aren't what's really happening on the inside of a person. And they don't really describe for us, what could we do better then? If you're looking for the tail to wag the dog, you're on the wrong end of things. So let's look at what is it's happening on the inside, which is same for men and women. But, the ways that we're acculturated are going to change what you're going to see on the outside. And I'm going to get into today, well, how does this look different? How does this look different for women in midlife versus men in midlife? Because a midlife crisis, which is what we're in, that we're dealing with well, should look like you look like your normal self for the most part. With a little bit more, you're taxed a little bit more. It's a stressful season in life. But a midlife crisis, which we're all in, and you don't have the resources available to you to handle it, that looks a little different in women. And I want to unpack that a little bit. So let's go back. So remember how I said that you can be prepared for anything, but you can't be prepared for everything? That there really is a distinction between these two? I want to start here. Because this is, I think, where we get messed up. We have a tendency, women, to overworry. These are things we've been taught to do, to try to have a plan for everything and a backup plan to that and a backup plan to that. And this is an orientation where the control is outside of us, we're feverishly trying to scramble and figure out plans for helping ourselves with any and all, everything that could happen to us. We want to have a plan for that, plan of attack for that. But that is a recipe for getting ourselves into the hot water of anxiety. That's just the reality of it, because there really isn't an exhaustible level of things that could happen to us. And if our orientation is having a plan, the plan is outside of us. It's not us that's the plan. I know we're carrying out the plan, but just hear me out. What we're really trying to do is control things outside of us. Well, if I do this and I have this ready and I'm in this kind of relationship and I have this kind of job and I'm doing these kinds of things in my life at this stage, then all of this should be okay. Oh, wait, there's a new variable. Okay, well, then if I do this, okay. Oh, wait, there's a new variable. Oh, no, if I do this, right? All the orientation is on controlling the things that are outside of you. And the problem, the flaw with this is it's outside your control. I know you have convinced yourself otherwise. And that is the story that internal mean girl is telling you when you're not trying to come up with a million different plans. I guarantee you, I have sat across the couch for thousands of hours from women who are getting into this anxiety driving space. Now, the danger here in midlife, which is kind of deceiving for you, right? Like, you may have been doing this all of your adult life. Let's be honest. You've been trying to control for everything. You've been trying to be prepared for everything for all your life, right? Let's be honest. Why isn't it working now? The danger in midlife is this. In midlife, our capacity for handling stress reduces biologically. That's the reality. Okay. We're moving from our ovaries creating our estrogen in the perimenopausal phase to our adrenal glands creating the estrogen. And the long and short, in a concise way of what that means, is that the organ that is controlling stress hormones is now also responsible for our sex hormones or estrogen. Not great. Right? Because the system, the adrenal system, is not going to be able to do as well as it did with stress prior to that when the ovaries were handling the estrogen. So you just literally don't have the ability to take on stress like you did. But you have a memory like an elephant, and you remember that you have been able to put your head down and just muscle through it for how many years. And so there is this experience where you're just like, what in the actual hell? Like, how is it possible that I can't handle this? I used to be able to handle so much more. The answer to that is yes. You used to be able to handle so much more than you're going to be able to handle now. And that is your biology. And that is just the stars. That's what's written there for you. That's the map. There's nothing I can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. Now, for those of us who are dipping during our perimenopausal phase too drastically, too quickly, HRT, having adaptogens, go back to my first 3 podcasts of this season and listen to Mary Bushcool and her advice to us on ways that we might come at that naturally. Listen just to a couple weeks ago, Heather Lillico talking about how to manage through movement, nutrition, and meditation, your anxiety levels. There are other things that we can bring to that. Right? There are other tools. So if you're handling it during this midlife transition, the amount of stress that's coming your way, it's not causing you more anxiety. And even though you can't handle stress biologically at the levels that you could, you're doing okay with it, then you're fine, right? But any of us that are finding it to be it feels more like a mood swing. Like all of a sudden you feel like, am I bipolar? What is happening? I don't even know who that woman is that just went off on her child. Oh, wait, it's me. How did that happen? Right? I don't even know who that woman is that just berated somebody, a customer at work. Like, what? I never would have done these things before. If that's what your experience is right now, then you might want to look into some of those other ways to augment that for you. But what you'll notice is on the inside, what's happening? Stress levels are higher than level of resource to manage the stress. We've got to get that back in equal, right? And what does that look like on the outside? It looks like mood swings. It looks like a high amount of anxiety, more than normal, like at your baseline. And it looks like you are kind of interpreting almost anything in your life to be a threat. right? Does this sound familiar? Okay. So you are in this quandary of trying to control for everything instead of trying to control for anything. So what's the difference, Dr. Natalie? Here's the difference. I would like to teach you through things like meditation, mindfulness practice, being self-aware and compassionately self-aware at that, and doing the right amount of self-care in the right ways for yourself. I want to teach you how to trust that you will be the ultimate figure it out machine at this time of your life. That is how you're prepared for anything. It has nothing to do with the different case scenarios. It has nothing to do with finding the right plan. It has everything to do with trusting the planner. And that is actually how you shift this, extraordinarily shift this. So if you've been somebody who throughout the rest of your adulthood has been a worrywart, has been somebody that's tried to control, and has been somebody who always had a plan and then a backup plan and then a backup plan for the backup plan, that's got a shelf life that's coming up, my friend. And so the way to shift is to get into this idea of always trusting yourself to figure it out no matter what comes your way. But the things you do to take care of the self that's going to do that work is very different, looks very different than coming up with 5 million case scenarios for how to be prepared for everything that's going to happen to you. You can't. Instead, it's about orienting to you and taking care of the vessel that's going to take care of those things. So then you can be prepared for anything. So that's a major distinction in what we're trying to accomplish. Now I'm going to get into the breakdown of it's a crisis level threat in our life as we're transitioning and there's this much change about both inside and outside of us. So let's just, again, not personalize that. That is not a character flaw. That is just a reality of the transition in our life that's happening to us right now. What we're watching for is if we're moving into survival mode or thrival mode. Now, obviously, the podcast is Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving. So I want you to get into thrival mode. And the difference here is survival mode just keeps us alive. Staying alive, staying alive. You remember, right? That's it. That's all it does. It doesn't let us enjoy life. It doesn't let us experience life. It doesn't let us create in life. It doesn't have any of those positives that we really do want to have in life. If we're surviving, we're just living. And so what is going to be really telltale between these two is if you're doing well, but you're feeling stuck. If you're doing well, but you're feeling blah. If you're doing well, because you think you're surviving, you think you've got this midlife crisis thing nailed in, dialed in. I got this. But life doesn't feel good or as good as it used to. That is a key indication that you've gone into survival mode and not thrival mode. I want to move you from this midlife crisis transition into a thrival mode. And that's why I named the show this. So let's break it down. How do you know if you're in survival mode? Okay, so the polyvagal nervous system theory, which is by Dr. Stephen Porges, really helps to break our nervous system response into 3 different categories. Ventral vagal is the top of the latter category. This is where we want to be. You may have heard me talk about this on the podcast before, but that's a state of nervous system being where we feel calm, where we feel like collected and able to take on things. This is being able to take on anything. This is the version where I want you to be. You're connected to your family, your friends, you feel loved, you feel like you belong, you're in alignment with your purpose in life. You know you want to get out of bed every day and you're excited to get out of bed every day. This is where you want to be in that ventral vagal state. You're safe, you're secure. You've got this. Now, safe and secure does not mean never uncomfortable. That is not actually a thing in humanity. So I want you to remember that being safe and secure means you're anchored into that state, but it doesn't mean you're not disrupted and you're not pushed and you're not, your feathers get ruffled from time to time and you have to rethink things through. It just means that you can anchor back into that state of safety and security and feeling like you belong within your tribe with ease. It doesn't take much when the stressor comes on for you to go back to that baseline. That's where we want to live. That's thrival mode. That's the top of the ladder. The middle of the ladder is the place where we most commonly think of when we think of survival mode. It's fight and flight, right? It's anger and anxiety and all of the different things that we do to get away from anger and to get away from anxiety. So this is the sympathetic nervous system response, or sympathetic nervous system, if you've heard that term before. This is one of the places that we go to when we're threatened in the world. And right now, your entire world is threatened by the midlife crisis. Everything in your life is going to change, physically on the inside and on the outside. It's going to start looking different. Right? If you raised a family, that family is probably aging in taking care of themselves. If you were, connected to your family of origin and still are, you might have parents that you're now responsible for. If you didn't have a family, didn't get married, maybe you got married but didn't have a family, you're now up against the biological clock is shutting off, and so you won't be a parent. Was that by choice? Was it by not choice? There's a whole life that you have to reckon with. There's a lot of grief there that you're going to have to reckon with. What does your career look like? Maybe you were punching in and punching out for years because you needed to tote the family around and make sure they got fed and doing all those things. And so the job was really not something that you were doing for your own enjoyment. It was something that you were doing because you had to have a paycheck because we live in a capitalistic society. So, where does that need to go in your, latter half of life? Midlife has a lot of changes coming at us. It's the crisis, right? So there is a threat out in our world right now. And if we're not ventrally vagally anchored, we can find ourselves in a state of fight or flight pretty quickly. Now, the difference between this threat response and the dorsal vagal threat response, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is that in the sympathetic nervous system, there is threat, but there is mobilization to create change. You are going to move your body, move your mind, move yourself through the world in such a way to either fight something off or flee from it. Those are the two ways in which this will show up. And sometimes it's a little bit of a combination, right? You're in a sympathetic nervous system state. For a little while, you sit and get irritable and frustrated and fight something, and then you start to avoid doing it for a while. So in women, here's what this looks like for me. When I'm sitting across the couch from you and you're in a stuck place around fight or flight, you're waking up every day and everything feels like a threat, and you don't realize that. You don't realize you're in survival mode. But what these women will tell me is, I'm having mood swings. What the hell? Am I depressed? Am I bipolar? I'm super anxious. I cannot, for the life of me, shut it off. The worrying thoughts, the overwhelm. It's like it intrudes in my mind and I can't get it out, even when I want to get it out. Do a mindfulness practice. Are you kidding me, doc? Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to sit still long enough for that to happen. So those are the kinds of things that look like midlife crisis in women. So again, crisis was already there, but they're not responding well yet. They're in that survival mode and they're in that anxious or angry stage of fight or flight. And so those are the kinds of things that are happening, and they're worrying all the time and they're trying to control things and they're getting into fights with their family more often. And, they're ready to just cut everybody off. There are some women that have walked in my office and said, yeah, I'm ready to tell them all, F it. They can go, they'll make their own meals that, the ladies at work can deal with this themselves. Like, I'm done. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm not helping people get out of their own messes. I'm done. I'm just like, I'm done. And I'm going to go off on to a tropical island and live the rest of my life by myself. Cause I hate humanity at this point. This is fight or flight, right? So this is, you are threatened by your world and you're in that state of mind. And so you're constantly either seeing in your outer life, being angry a lot, being irritable a lot, or wanting to avoid things entirely, like actively trying to push away and avoid things that just you're done with, right? So this is what the midlife crisis will look like when a woman is not managing it well and not responding and not able to anchor back to that ventral vagal stage. Now, here's the thing about that level of survival mode. It's not sustainable, right? We cannot be angry all the time. We cannot run for 24 hours a day. Okay, let me just, let's say 18 hours a day and sleep the rest of the day. because you have to, get some rest in there. Like it's just not a sustainable pitch in our body, in our biology. So what actually is going to happen is you're going to see this other layer of the survival mode, which is called dorsal vagal. The dorsal vagal response has its two premises. A, there is a threat, just like in the sympathetic nervous system. So it's interpreting everything in its world to be a threat. But the response is to freeze or fall or even fawn. And let me break those down into a couple different, what does it look like out into the real world? So if you're frozen, and I think some of you have heard kind of in pop culture, this idea of functional freezing, what's happening is you don't have motivation to do anything outside of the automaticity of your life. Getting up, going to work, putting in what you have to put into that, putting in what you have to your home life, going to bed, and repeating the cycle. Every other minute of your day is spent just vegging out, zoning out, numbing out in some capacity. So for women, this functional freeze state can look something like, okay, I have no motivation to get anything done on my to-do list. So my to-do list goes this far out my door, but I'm just going to beat myself up every day at the end of the day that I didn't get to anything. I might even rack a couple more things on to that big laundry list of things to do and just get in my head and beat myself up. So this is an oscillation between internally in that fight response of the sympathetic nervous system, having that internal mean girl beat you up essentially, and then going into I can't even move. I can't do the things that I need to do not to feel that threat. And so I'm just sitting here frozen. So that's one form of that dorsal vagal. You're threatened, but you're immobilized. Another idea here is that you fall, that you just collapse. So you might be watching a lot more TV, not getting up and doing very much on the weekends, not seeing people, even if you had wanted to see them, not feeling joy anymore in the things that used to bring joy to you, feeling pretty blah or meh most of the time, and certainly feeling stuck, feeling like there's, it's hopeless, it's helpless. There's nothing that's going to change any of this. I can't move beyond where I am. Right? And you may even have a little bit of that avoidance and then this, and avoidance and then this. So you go back to that sympathetic nervous system response of, I have to avoid crowds. I can't go out in social settings. I'm going to push myself away from that. And then instead, I'm going to fall at home and not get out of my pajamas and watch Netflix all day. So those are some of the things that you're going to see at that midlife crisis response when you're not doing so well and don't have the resources. And then the final response in this dorsal vagal, you are immobilized, but you also feel the threat of change, is fawning. Fawning is an interesting response. And as some of the people that I teach about this struggle with the idea because there does seem to be kind of an active mobilized feature of fawning. Fawning essentially is when women are trying to avoid conflict altogether by preventatively figuring out how to people please everyone and everything in their life so that no conflict actually arises. You are planning in your head for case scenarios, right? So it seems a little active. It is oscillating between sympathetic and dorsal vagal, but the end goal here is if I can just create a world where no conflict will ever happen again for the rest of my life, I'll be okay. Right? So you're ahead of time anticipating this will piss this person off. So I better do this over here so that they don't get angry. At work, I know that my boss doesn't like when la, 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 la doesn't happen. So I'll make sure that all of those things happen. And you're killing yourself trying to get all those things to happen. There is some falling in between there as well, where you're just vegging out on the couch because obviously what little energy you do have, you're using towards things that are not useful to you at all. So this is when the crisis of our midlife is functionally impairing you in your life. And that's really the things I'm looking for. right? I'm looking for you to tell me holiday dinners feel irritating to me. I have a lot of work that I have to prepare. It's only 45 minutes. It's not bringing me very much joy on the other end. Whereas a version of you 5 or 10 years earlier would have loved all of that and have wanted to spend time with the people that you love most. I'm looking for those telltale signs to tell me you're not doing so well. And then we'll start talking about what are the things that you can be doing to help yourself pull out of this. So what are those things, right? Oh my gosh, I am sure that you are on pins and needles wanting to know a little bit more about that. Well, here's the thing. What I'm describing is clinical levels of needing extra help. I want you to seek your medical professionals. I want you to listen if they tell you that you should go see a therapist like myself, because some of this is a very individualized experience, and nothing that I tell you on this podcast is ever going to pull you out of that level of depth. But what I would say is, for those of you who are doing okay with this, yes, there'll be times where you're threatened and you're seeing those survival mode responses. But if you notice those, I want you to anchor back to that safe and secure connected feeling at the top, that ventral vagal nervous system response, where you are feeling like you belong. Connect with the people in your life. Go back to one of my podcasts on self-care and the various kinds of neurochemicals that get released during times where we're feeling happy and joyful and good, and how you can kind of biohack that in your own self-care. In fact, I'll even link a free gift in today's notes for the podcast so that you can go back to that. But what I'm going to tell you is there is no magical cure at this point that I can say, do these 3 things and you're going to be good. So if you're not anchoring back into that ventral vagal thriving state, if you're not finding your centered life thriving in this midlife crisis that we're all in together, then I want you to get a little extra help. And that'll either be a combination of biological and psychological, or one or the other. Sometimes people start with the biological. They go talk to their doctors about hormone replacement therapy or other things that could be helping them. But some of us also just show up at a therapist's office and start to kind of go through, what are these ways of being in the world that are no longer going to work for me? You know, going back to the person that wants to plan for everything, that's one of the ones that's pretty, common for us to be working through in your midlife crisis. You can't deal with stress that way. You really couldn't before, but you were, pushing yourself at a max capacity that's no longer sustainable for anybody, not for you for sure. So let's talk about, how do we have you focus on you and trusting you and having a relationship with you and loving yourself and knowing that the you that you're taking care of, can take on anything. She'll figure it out. We don't need to know what the worst case scenario is. We'll just trust that future version of you is going to be able to handle that, right? Those are the things that I would encourage you to start thinking about. Is, if I'm not able to anchor back into that ventral vagal, I'm going to go get some therapy, or I'm going to go talk to a medical professional. And if I'm finding myself kind of commonly in these places that Dr. Natalie has talked about today, where I'm not enjoying my life the way that I used to, it's all falling flat, that's depression, my friends. It's an adjustment depression. You're adjusting to this life-changing stage, and you're not able to rely on the old ways of doing things that worked for you in the past. They're not going to work for you in this second phase of life. New biology and new life circumstances have it so that you're going to have to be creative and figure that out. Keep listening to the podcast, because if you're one of those people that just needs some new ideas for anchoring back to that ventral vagal way of being, then I'm sure that something on the podcast here will be useful to you. But for those of you that are really feeling challenged during this phase of life, fret not, my friend. You are in a crisis just like the rest of us. This is not a character flaw that this isn't working for you. It's a design flaw. It's the way we were socially and culturally programmed to be in the world as women that no longer is going to serve us in this second half of life. And it's professionals like myself and other people that I've invited on to the podcast that are going to help you get through this. We can, I promise you. But if this is at a clinical level, I definitely am recommending that you go get clinical levels of help. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Stay compassionately self-aware about, am I survival mode or am I thrival mode? And try and find the things that anchor you back to that centered life thriving. Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I have to make sure at the end of each of these episodes that I give you the disclaimer that none of the material that I talk about in these podcasts is meant to replace any kind of therapy or formal medical or mental health treatment. And in fact, anything that I offer on my website, my coaching programs, any kind of psychoeducational materials that I release are not a replacement for that level of care. So just take that into account when you listen. This is information for you, and hopefully you find it of value, both as an educational tool and for your entertainment. And I also want to mention that if anyone you know is in a mental health crisis, needs additional help, I always include these two crisis resources. They're available to anybody.
Pick up the phone and dial 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
And you can always visit their website at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Additionally, there's actually a crisis text line. So if you're not somebody that likes to pick up the phone,
text HOME, home, to 741-741.
to the crisis text line. And you can find them online at crisistextline.org. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And I hope that you like and follow me wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe consider leaving me a review. It always helps me to keep this podcast relevant when I know what you want to hear about.